The stage of Harpo Studios glowed under a cascade of brilliant lights, its polished floors and plush velvet chairs radiating an aura of elegance that matched the grandeur of Oprah Winfrey's media empire. The audience, a vibrant mosaic of eager faces, hummed with anticipation, their whispers filling the vast studio as cameras prepared to broadcast live to millions. This was no ordinary show. It was a special titled Spirituality in the New Age, a platform for bold ideas and transformative dialogue featuring spiritual leaders, motivational speakers, and one unexpected guest. Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary frontman of Black Sabbath. Born John Michael Osbourne in Birmingham, England, and revered as the Prince of Darkness for his pioneering role in heavy metal. Oprah, the undisputed queen of media, sat at the center, her warm smile a beacon of familiarity, her presence commanding, yet approachable. Beneath her polished charm, however, lay a strategic plan, shared only with her trusted producers, to challenge Ozzy's Catholic faith, a lesser-known facet of the rock icon's life, and expose its rigidity against her inclusive, marketable vision of spirituality. She believed her sharp wit and media savvy could unsettle Ozzy, a man whose wild stage persona seemed at odds with traditional beliefs, making him an ideal target to highlight the flaws of a singular path to truth. What Oprah didn't foresee was that Ozzy, with his raw sincerity and hard-won wisdom, would turn her carefully laid trap into a moment of profound revelation, one that would shake the studio and challenge her empire's foundation. As the show began, the audience's applause roared like a tidal wave, amplifying the electric atmosphere. Oprah introduced the special with her signature warmth, framing it as an exploration of diverse paths to meaning in a complex world. Among her guests was Ozzy, a figure whose name conjured images of sold-out arenas and provocative lyrics, not quiet devotion. To her, he was a paradox, a rock star whose Catholic roots clashed with his Prince of Darkness moniker, making him ripe for a public unraveling. In the control room, Marcus, her ambitious producer, watched with a sly grin, certain that inviting Ozzy was a ratings coup. He'd pushed for this, whispering to colleagues that the rocker's eccentricities would either flop spectacularly or spark viral controversy. In the audience sat Sarah, a devoted fan who'd once met Ozzy after a concert, his kind words and shared prayer anchoring her through a personal crisis. Now, as Ozzy stepped onto the stage, she clutched her hands, sensing this moment held weight beyond the spectacle. Ozzy entered with a calm stride, dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, a far cry from his stage theatrics. Tucked in his pocket was a small silver cross, a gift from his mother, not for show, but as a private reminder of his faith. The audience clapped politely, their curiosity piqued by this unassuming figure so different from the wild icon they knew. Oprah greeted him warmly, her voice smooth as silk. "Ozzy, it's a privilege to have you here," she said, her smile inviting, but her eyes sharp with intent. "We're diving into spirituality, hope, and what guides us today." Ozzy nodded, a faint grin on his lips. "Cheers, Oprah," he replied, his Birmingham accent thick and warm. "Glad to be here." He settled into his chair, relaxed yet alert, knowing this was no casual chat. He'd heard of Oprah's spiritual ventures, her costly courses, her New Age partnerships. And while he held no judgment, he was ready to stand firm if his faith was tested. Before the cameras rolled, he'd paused backstage, whispering a prayer for courage and clarity. Oprah started gently asking about Ozzy's journey with Black Sabbath, his solo career, and the chaos of fame. Ozzy answered with honesty, his humor drawing laughs, as he recounted writing songs in dingy pubs and navigating the music industry's wild ride. Sarah smiled, recalling the Ozzy who had taken time to listen to her years ago. Marcus in the control room tapped his foot, eager for the real showdown. Then Oprah pivoted, her tone sharpening. "Ozzy," she said, leaning forward, "you're known as the Prince of Darkness, a rebel who shook the world. But you've also spoken about your Catholic faith. In a world where people find meaning in so many ways, meditation, self-discovery, global traditions, isn't it narrow to say there's only one path to God?" The question cut through the air, a deliberate challenge to Ozzy's beliefs. The audience hushed, sensing the stakes. Oprah expected him to falter, either defending his faith too rigidly or softening it to appease the crowd. Marcus smirked, anticipating a stumble. But Ozzy didn't waver. He looked at Oprah, then the audience, his eyes steady and warm. "Oprah," he began, his voice low, "let me tell you about me, Mum. We grew up skint in Birmingham, barely scraping by. Mum took us to Mass every Sunday, no matter how knackered she was. She'd say, 'John, God's got your back even when life's a mess.' I was a wild lad, didn't always listen, but when I hit rock bottom, lost in drink drugs, the lot, her words, pulled me back. That faith, that cross she gave me, it's what kept me going." He touched his pocket where the cross rested. The story landed like a quiet thunderbolt, its raw truth stirring the audience. Sarah wiped a tear, moved by the echo of her own experience. Even Marcus paused, caught off guard. Oprah, expecting a debate, not a heartfelt tale, pressed on. "That's touching, Ozzy," she said, her smile tight. "But I'm asking about your faith's claim to be the only way. Isn't that unfair in a diverse world?" Ozzy leaned forward, unfazed. "I ain't forcing anyone to believe me," he said. "But when I was drowning, I found a lifeline in Jesus, not a religion, a person. He didn't care I was a mess. He just said, 'Come.' That's what I know, and I gotta share it." The audience erupted in soft applause, their hearts touched by his sincerity. Oprah's composure wavered, her plan unraveling as the segment cut to a break. She glanced at Ozzy, her eyes a mix of frustration and respect, knowing the battle was far from over. The lights in Harpo Studios snapped back to life, bathing the stage in a warm golden glow as the commercial break ended, signaling the return of Oprah Winfrey's much-anticipated spirituality in the New Age special. The audience, still reeling from the unexpected depth of Ozzy Osbourne's opening words, settled into their seats, their eyes flickering between the media titan and the heavy metal legend. What had begun as a polished talk show had morphed into something rawer, a clash of worldviews that crackled with intensity. Oprah, her usual confidence shaken by Ozzy's unyielding sincerity, felt the weight of the moment. She'd built an empire on steering narratives, guiding guests into her framework of inclusive, marketable spirituality. But Ozzy, born John Michael Osbourne in Birmingham, England, the iconic Prince of Darkness and frontman of Black Sabbath, was proving to be an immovable force. His Catholic faith, worn not as a badge, but as a quiet anchor, had already stirred the audience with its grounded authenticity. In the control room, Marcus, Oprah's ambitious producer, paced nervously, his earlier smirk replaced by a furrowed brow. He'd banked on Ozzy's eccentric rock star persona to deliver drama, not this disarming blend of humor and conviction that was stealing the crowd's heart. Among the audience, Sarah, a longtime fan, who had once found solace in Ozzy's kindness during a personal crisis, clutched her hands, her heart swelling with pride as she watched him hold his own. Another figure, Father Michael, a priest who'd crossed paths with Ozzy at a charity event, sat quietly in the crowd, his presence unnoticed, but his memories of Ozzy's quiet generosity vivid. As the cameras rolled, Oprah leaned forward, her smile professional, but tinged with a steely edge, determined to regain control. She wasn't ready to let Ozzy's raw honesty redefine her stage, but she didn't yet realize that his words, were about to challenge not just her narrative, but the very foundation of her spiritual empire. Oprah opened the segment with a practiced grace, her voice smooth, but carrying a subtle challenge. "Welcome back, everyone," she said, addressing the audience and the millions watching at home. "We're here with Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary voice of heavy metal, diving into a powerful conversation about faith and meaning." She turned to Ozzy, her eyes was narrowing slightly. "Ozzy, you've shared a moving story about your mother and how your Catholic faith grounded you. But let's get real for a moment. Your public image, the Prince of Darkness, the wild stage antics, the biting heads off bats doesn't exactly scream devout Catholic." A ripple of laughter ran through the audience, breaking the tension momentarily. Oprah seized the moment, her tone sharpening. "You've built a career on rebellion, yet you claim this faith is central to your life. Some might say you're using it to soften your image to make yourself more relatable. How do you respond to that?" The question was a calculated jab, designed to paint Ozzy as a hypocrite, leveraging faith for public appeal. The audience stirred, some nodding in agreement with Oprah's skepticism, others waiting eagerly for Ozzy's reply. Marcus in the control room leaned closer to the monitor, sensing a chance for the drama he'd hoped for. Sarah, however, felt a pang of frustration, knowing the Ozzy who'd once written her a letter of encouragement, urging her to pray through her struggles. Father Michael, his hands clasped in his lap, recalled a late-night conversation with Ozzy at a shelter where the rocker had spoken humbly about his faith far from any spotlight. Ozzy didn't flinch. He grinned, that familiar mischievous spark in his eyes, and leaned back in his chair, his Birmingham accent thick as he spoke. "Oprah, you want to talk about the bat thing? Fair enough, I've done some daft stuff." The audience laughed, charmed by his self-deprecation. "But let me tell you about a night in Birmingham, years back, when I was a proper mess, booze, drugs, the lot. I stumbled into a church looking like I'd crawled out of a horror flick, all leather and chains. The priest didn't bat an eye. He just sat me down, gave me a cuppa, and said, 'God don't care what you look like, John. He sees your heart.'" Ozzy paused, his gaze sweeping the audience, his voice softening. "That's what faith is to me, not a costume I put on to look good, but the thing that kept me alive when I was falling apart." The studio grew quiet, the weight of his words settling over the crowd like a gentle fog. Sarah dabbed at her eyes, remembering how Ozzy's letter had echoed that same compassion, urging her to find strength in prayer. Father Michael nodded silently, his memory of Ozzy's quiet donations to a local shelter flashing through his mind. Marcus, however, frowned, texting an assistant to urge Oprah to pivot. She was losing the narrative. Oprah, sensing the audience's shift toward Ozzy, pressed harder, her smile tight but professional. "That's a compelling story, Ozzy," she said, her tone measured but pointed. "But let's broaden this. Your faith claims Jesus is the only way to God. In a global world where billions find meaning in other traditions, Buddhism, Islam, meditation, or even no religion at all, don't you think that's a limited perspective? Aren't you, in a way, dismissing the paths that work for others?" The question was a masterstroke designed to frame Ozzy as narrow-minded in a culture that celebrated diversity. The audience murmured, some nodding in approval of Oprah's challenge, others waiting to see how Ozzy would navigate the minefield. Marcus grinned, certain Ozzy would either double down and alienate the crowd, or backtrack and look weak. But Ozzy leaned forward, his eyes locking with Oprah's, his voice steady yet warm. "Oprah, I ain't here to knock anyone's path," he said. "I've got mates who follow all sorts, Hinduism, Islam, you name it. One of me best mates back in the day was a Muslim bloke who'd pray 5 times a day no matter where we were on tour. He'd tell me about his faith, and I respected it, because he was searching for something real. But for me, when I was at me lowest, it was Jesus who showed up. Not a set of rules, not a church building, but him saying, "John, I've got you." I'm not saying everyone else is wrong. I'm saying I've found the truth that saved me, and I'd be a liar if I didn't share it. The audience erupted in scattered applause, some clapping hesitantly, others with conviction moved by the sincerity in his voice. Sarah clapped softly, her heart full, while Father Michael smiled, recognizing the humility in Ozzy's words. Oprah's composure faltered for a split second, her mind racing to regain control. She hadn't expected Ozzy to turn her challenge into a testimony that bridged respect for others with unyielding faith. She tried a new angle, her voice rising slightly. "Ozzy, you talk about truth, but your faith is rooted in a specific tradition. My work, my books, my courses has helped millions find peace through universal principles not tied to one religion. Are you saying that's less valid because it doesn't align with your beliefs?" The question was a trap designed to force Ozzy to either criticize her empire or dilute his stance. The audience leaned in, the tension thick. Marcus in the control room held his breath, hoping for a misstep. But Ozzy didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, touching the small silver cross, and spoke with a quiet intensity. "Oprah, what you do helps folks feel better. And that's good. I've seen people at me shows broken looking for something. I've been that person. But feeling better ain't the same as being whole. Let me tell you about a kid I met after a gig in Birmingham. Young lad, maybe 16, strung out, no family, no hope. I gave him me cross, not this one another, and told him to pray not because I'm some holy roller, but because I know what it's like to be lost. He wrote me later, said he went to a church, found people who helped him get clean. That's what I'm talking about. Not a course you pay for, but a truth that's free." The studio fell silent, the audience absorbing the raw power of his story. Sarah wept openly now, her own letter from Ozzy tucked in her purse, a reminder of his impact. Father Michael stood briefly, his voice cutting through the hush, to say, "I've seen Ozzy's faith in action, helping shelters kids without a camera in sight." The audience clapped again louder, now their hearts swaying toward Ozzy. Oprah, her hands gripping her chair, felt the ground shift. Her empire thrived on selling hope, but Ozzy's words, unpolished, unscripted, were piercing through her carefully curated narrative. She rallied, her voice firm. "Ozzy, you're a public figure with influence. When you talk about Jesus as the only way, you're shaping how people think, how they live. Isn't that a kind of power, maybe even a dangerous one?" The accusation was bold, implying Ozzy's faith was a tool to control his fans. The audience murmured, some nodding, others waiting. Ozzy looked at her, his eyes soft but unflinching. "Oprah power's a funny thing," he said. "You can use it to build yourself up or to lift others. I'm not here to control anyone. I'm just a bloke who sings praise and tries to live what I believe. If that helps one person find hope like that kid in Birmingham, then that's not my power, it's God's." The studio erupted in applause, not polite, but heartfelt, as tears streaked down faces. Sarah stood clapping fiercely while Father Michael prayed silently. Marcus, exasperated, threw up his hands. Oprah, her smile fading, knew she was losing the audience. As the segment cut to another break, she looked at Ozzy, her eyes a mix of defeat and dawning respect. The battle wasn't over, but Ozzy's quiet strength was rewriting the script, and what came next would change everything. The Harpo Studios stage pulsed with an unspoken tension as the lights flared back to life, signaling the end of the commercial break and the continuation of Oprah Winfrey's spirituality in the New Age special. The audience, their emotions still raw from the electric exchange between Oprah and Ozzy Osbourne, sat in rapt anticipation, their eyes darting between the media icon and the heavy metal legend-born John Michael Osborne in Birmingham, England, the Prince of Darkness, who'd redefined music as Black Sabbath's frontman. What had started as a polished showcase of diverse spiritual perspectives had become a battleground of conviction, with Ozzy's unyielding Catholic faith challenging Oprah's carefully curated empire of inclusive, marketable spirituality. Oprah, her usual mastery of the stage shaken by Ozzy's raw sincerity, felt the weight of the moment pressing against her. She'd built her legacy on guiding conversations, but Ozzy's heartfelt stories and disarming honesty were swaying the audience, their applause growing louder with each response. In the control room, Marcus, her sharp-witted producer, paced frantically, his earlier confidence replaced by panic, as he texted assistants urging Oprah to steer the narrative back to her terms. He'd banked on Ozzy's rock star persona to crumble under scrutiny, not to command the room with tales of faith and redemption. Among the audience, Sarah, a devoted fan whose life had been touched by Ozzy's kindness years ago, clutched a letter he'd once sent her, her heart swelling with pride. Father Michael, a priest who'd witnessed Ozzy's quiet acts of charity, sat silently, his presence a subtle testament to the rocker's authenticity. As the cameras rolled, Oprah straightened in her chair, her smile tight but professional, determined to reclaim her stage. She didn't yet realize that Ozzy's words were about to crack the foundation of her empire, forcing her to confront truths she'd long avoided. Oprah opened the segment with a measured tone, her voice smooth but laced with a calculated edge. "Welcome back," she said, addressing the audience and the millions watching at home. "We're here with Ozzy Osbourne, the voice of heavy metal, sharing powerful stories about his Catholic faith. Ozzy, you've given us a lot to think about, and I appreciate your candor." She paused, her eyes locking onto his, a glint of challenge beneath her warmth. "But let's dig deeper. Your faith says Jesus is the only way to God, a claim that's central to your beliefs. My work, my books, my courses, my conversations has helped millions find peace through universal principles not tied to one religion. Are you saying that what I've built, what's transformed lives around the world, is somehow less valid because it doesn't align with your faith?" The question was a masterstroke, a rhetorical landmine designed to force Ozzy into a corner. If he criticized her empire, he'd risk alienating her devoted audience. If he endorsed her work, he'd dilute his own convictions. The audience leaned in the air, thick with anticipation. Marcus in the control room grinned, certain Ozzy would stumble. Sarah held her breath, her faith in Ozzy unwavering, while Father Michael prayed silently, sensing the weight of the moment. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression on Ozzy's face, waiting for his response. Ozzy didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, his hand brushing the small silver cross in his pocket, his Birmingham accent warm and unpolished. "Oprah," he began, his voice steady but gentle. "Let me tell you about a night in Birmingham after a gig. I was outside the venue signing autographs when this family came up, a mum-dad and their kid, maybe 10 years old. They were homeless, sleeping in their car, barely getting by. They weren't asking for money, just a moment to talk. I don't know why, but I started telling them about a shelter I knew run by a Catholic charity. I gave them a number, told them to mention my name. Later they wrote me, said that shelter took them in, helped them get back on their feet. The kid's in school now, doing all right." He paused, his eyes sweeping the audience not for effect, but to connect. "I'm not saying your work don't help people, Oprah. You've done good, lifted folks up, and that matters. But what I found, what pulled me out of my own darkness, wasn't a course or a book. It was Jesus offering something that don't run out when the money does. The studio fell silent, the audience absorbing the raw truth of his story. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, her own memories of Ozzy's kindness echoing in her heart. Father Michael nodded, recalling Ozzy's unpublicized donations to that same shelter. Marcus, however, slammed his fist on the control room desk, frustrated, as the audience began to clap their applause, soft but growing. Oprah's smile faltered, her mind racing to counter the shift in the room. She hadn't expected Ozzy to sidestep her trap with a story that grounded his faith in tangible acts of compassion. She pressed on, her voice rising slightly, a hint of strain breaking through her composure. "Ozzy, that's a beautiful story, and I don't doubt your sincerity," she said. "But you're avoiding the bigger question. My work draws from universal truths, love, hope, self-discovery that transcend any one religion. Your faith, with its exclusive claim to truth, seems to dismiss the billions who find meaning elsewhere. Don't you think that's judgmental, even arrogant?" The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others waiting for Ozzy's response. The question was a direct challenge designed to paint him as intolerant in a world that prized open-mindedness. Marcus leaned forward, hoping for a misstep that would restore Oprah's dominance. But Ozzy didn't flinch. He looked at Oprah, his eyes soft but unwavering, and spoke with a quiet intensity. "Oprah, I ain't judging nobody," he said. "I've been the screw-up, the guy everyone thought was too far gone. I looked for answers everywhere, booze, drugs, even dabbled in other philosophies. Nothing stuck till I found Jesus. Let me tell you about a mate of mine, a roadie on our tours, Hindu fella. We'd talk late nights about life, God, all of it. He'd pray his way, I'd pray mine. I didn't tell him he was wrong. I told him what saved me. If I believe Jesus is the way, it ain't about being better than anyone. It's about offering a hand to someone who's drowning like I was." The audience erupted in applause, louder now, some standing as the weight of his words hit home. Sarah clapped fiercely, her heart full, while Father Michael whispered a prayer of gratitude. Oprah, her hands gripping her chair, felt the ground slipping beneath her. Her empire thrived on universal principles packaged and sold as accessible hope, but Ozzy's stories, raw, unpolished, rooted in real lives, were piercing through her narrative. Desperate to regain control, she leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Ozzy, you're a public figure, a legend with millions of fans. When you talk about Jesus as the only way, you're not just sharing a personal belief, you're influencing how people think, how they live. Isn't that a kind of power, one that could be dangerous if it shuts out other paths?" The accusation was bold, implying Ozzy's faith was a tool to manipulate his audience. The crowd stirred, some nodding, others waiting. Marcus, sensing a chance for Oprah to reclaim the stage, pumped his fist. But Ozzy smiled a gentle, knowing grin and reached for the cross in his pocket. "Oprah power's a tricky thing," he said. "I've had fame, money, all of it, and it nearly killed me. My faith ain't about power, it's about freedom. Freedom from the mess I made of my life. Let me tell you about a lass I met at a rehab center I helped fund. She was lost, like I was thought she'd never climb out. I told her about the cross, about praying when you've got nothing left. She's sober now, got a job, a kid she's raising right. If me talking about Jesus helps one person like her, that's not me controlling anyone. It's me pointing to the one who saved me." The studio exploded in applause, the sound swelling with emotion. Sarah stood, tears streaming, as Father Michael rose, his voice cutting through the noise. "I've seen Ozzy's faith change lives quietly, without fanfare." The audience roared louder, some crying, others nodding in awe. Oprah sat frozen, her face pale as the realization hit she wasn't just losing the debate. She was losing the audience's heart. Her empire, built on selling hope at a premium, felt hollow against Ozzy's free, unpolished truth. As the segment cut to another break, she looked at him, her eyes a mix of frustration and reluctant admiration. Marcus in the control room threw up his hands, cursing the ratings he'd misjudged. Sarah and Father Michael exchanged a glance, their faith in Ozzy validated. The stage was set for a final reckoning, and Oprah knew the next segment would test her like never before. Ozzy, his hand on the cross, sat calmly ready for whatever came next, his heart anchored in a truth bigger than any spotlight. The Harpo Studios stage, bathed in a soft golden glow, felt transformed as the final segment of Oprah Winfrey's Spirituality in the New Age special began. The air thick with a reverent hush that transcended the usual buzz of a live broadcast. The audience, their emotions stirred by the raw intensity of the previous exchanges, sat in quiet anticipation, their eyes fixed on Oprah and Ozzy. Osbourne, the legendary frontman of Black Sabbath, born John Michael Osbourne in Birmingham, England, and known to the world as the Prince of Darkness. What had started as a polished talk show designed to showcase diverse spiritual paths had become a profound confrontation not just of ideas, but of hearts. Ozzy's unyielding Catholic faith, delivered with unpolished sincerity and grounded in stories of real lives, had shifted the room's energy, challenging the foundation of Oprah's empire of inclusive, marketable spirituality. In the control room, Marcus, her ambitious producer, sat slumped. His earlier confidence shattered as he watched the audience sway toward Ozzy, his texts to Oprah unanswered. Sarah, a devoted fan whose life had been touched by Ozzy's kindness years ago, held her breath, clutching a letter from him that had once given her hope. Father Michael, a priest who'd seen Ozzy's quiet acts of charity, sat with clasped hands, his presence a silent affirmation of the rocker's authenticity. Oprah, her usual command fraying, felt a crack forming in her carefully curated facade. She'd built a legacy on selling hope, but Ozzy's words, free, raw, and piercing, had exposed a deeper truth she couldn't ignore. As the cameras rolled, she took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, knowing this moment could redefine not just the show, but her own heart. Ozzy, his small silver cross tucked in his pocket, sat calmly, his eyes steady with compassion, ready to speak truth, no matter the cost. Oprah began the segment with a softer tone, her voice stripped of its earlier edge, as if the weight of Ozzy's words had humbled her. "Welcome back," she said, her gaze meeting the audience's, then settling on Ozzy. "We're here with Ozzy Osbourne, whose stories of faith have given us so much to reflect on. Ozzy, your honesty, your conviction, it's powerful." She paused, her eyes searching his face, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her polished exterior. "But I need to understand something. How can you be so sure that your faith, your Jesus, is the only truth? I've spent my life helping people find peace through meditation, self-discovery, universal wisdom. Are you saying all of that is wrong, that it's not enough?" The question wasn't a trap this time. It was a raw plea, a crack in the armor of a woman who'd built an empire on answers but now faced her own doubts. The audience leaned in, sensing the shift, their silence almost sacred. Marcus in the control room stared at the monitor, stunned by Oprah's candor, his plans for drama irrelevant. Sarah's heart raced, her faith in Ozzy's sincerity, unwavering, while Father Michael prayed silently, sensing a turning point. Ozzy looked at Oprah, his eyes soft but unflinching, and reached for the cross in his pocket, not to display it, but to ground himself. "Oprah," he said, his Birmingham accent warm and deliberate, "I ain't here to tear down what you've done. You've helped folks, and that's real. But let me tell you about a time I was lost. Proper lost, after a tour. I'd made a mess of everything, family, health, all of it. I walked into a church, didn't even know why. I was a wreck, tattoos, leather, the lot. The priest didn't care. He just said, "John, God's waiting." That's when I knew Jesus didn't need me to be perfect. He took me as I was broken and all. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Your work helps people feel better, and that's good. But peace that fades, when the course ends, when the money's gone, that ain't enough. I found a hope that lasts, and I believe it's Jesus." The studio was silent, the audience hanging on his words, some wiping tears, others nodding as if his story had unlocked something within them. Sarah wept quietly, her letter from Ozzy, a reminder of how his faith had touched her life. Father Michael's eyes glistened, recalling Ozzy's quiet support for a Birmingham shelter that had saved countless lives. Oprah's hands trembled, her mind wrestling with a truth she'd avoided. Her empire offered comfort, but not salvation. She tried to respond, her voice catching. "Ozzy, I've helped millions find purpose. Joy. Are you saying that doesn't matter because it's not your faith?" Her tone was defensive, but beneath it lay a deeper question. What if I've been wrong? Ozzy smiled gently, disarming without dismissing her. "Oprah, what you've done matters. Kindness always does. But it's not about who's done more good. It's about what makes us whole. Jesus didn't come to make me comfortable. He came to make me new. That's what I'm sharing, not to put you down, but to point to something bigger." The audience clapped softly, their applause growing as his words sank in. Marcus, exasperated, threw up his hands, realizing the show had slipped beyond his control. Sarah stood, her voice breaking through the hush. "Ozzy helped me when I was lost. He sent me a letter, told me to pray, and it changed my life." Her words, unplanned and raw, stirred the crowd, some gasping, others nodding in awe. Oprah's face crumpled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She stood, her legs unsteady, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ozzy, I've built my life on helping people, on giving them hope. But if I've been pointing them to something that's not enough, what does that make me?" The admission hung in the air, a vulnerable confession from a woman who'd rarely shown weakness. The audience gasped, their icon revealing a humanity they'd never seen. Ozzy stood too, not to claim victory, but to meet her where she was. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his voice tender. "Oprah, it makes you human like me, like all of us. The good news is Jesus don't need you to have it all figured out. He takes your mistakes, your broken bits, and makes something beautiful. That's grace." Tears streamed down Oprah's face, unscripted and real, and she didn't hide them. The audience, many crying too, watched in awe as their hero knelt not in defeat, but in surrender. "I've always been in control," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to let go." Ozzy knelt beside her, his voice a lifeline. "That's where he meets you when you're out of answers, ready to listen. That's where we all start." He looked at the audience, his eyes shining with compassion. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And that ain't about money, it's about knowing you need him. That's where freedom begins. The studio felt like a sacred space. The pretense of performance melted away. Father Michael stood, his voice soft but clear, offering a prayer. "Lord, guide your daughter, Oprah, and all of us to your truth, your love, your rest." The audience joined in, some praying, others simply holding space for the moment's wait. Sarah, tears streaming, felt her own faith renewed the letter in her purse, a testament to Ozzy's impact. Marcus in the control room sat speechless, the ratings forgotten. Oprah stood, her face softer, her eyes clearer. "I don't know what this means for my work," she said, her voice honest, "but I can't go back to pretending I have all the answers." The audience applauded not for spectacle, but for courage, their claps gentle and heartfelt. As the show ended, no music played, no fanfare sounded, just a reverent silence. In the months that followed, Oprah announced a shift, ending her costly spiritual courses and focusing on quiet acts of service, visiting shelters, supporting families, sharing a hope she'd newly discovered. Ozzy continued his music and his faith unchanged, but deepened his humility, a light to others. The lesson was clear: truth spoken with love can pierce even the hardest hearts. Faith doesn't need flash or profit. It thrives in humility and action. In a world chasing quick fixes, Ozzy's stand reminded all to seek what lasts: love, grace, and a Savior who meets us where we are. The audience left transformed, asking themselves, what am I holding on to, and am I brave enough to let truth reshape it? The path to freedom, they learned, begins with a single honest step.